Welcome back. It's been a couple of weeks. It's time for an update. I feel like I'm finally starting to get to a point where I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So, at this point, I've got most of an intake manifold. I've got the wideband done. All the wiring's done with the exception of one wire to the fuel pump. And so as a result, it's starting to feel like a bike, and I could start putting body panels back on it. So right now I've got the tank on for test fitment, but yeah, at this point, these are tied up till I make sure I don't need them. I got the last of these run, and it's actually pretty cool. I get to play with CAN bus. I've never gotten to use CAN bus for anything, and the wideband's on it, so that's going to be fun. And I needed to know what my air fuel was, so I actually ended up having to fire the wideband I wanted to use, and I've replaced it with a new X Series AE Abuego. It turned out the one I was going to use didn't actually do, it didn't have an analog output, or CAN bus, I guess, in this case. So I had to find another one, had to wire it in. So way back there, we've got the same thing we had going before. And now at this point, well, at least I know it'll work on the Ducati. So the Ducati now will get a wideband, at least to, be able to take on and off and whatnot. But yeah, so now at this point, we are up to a done manifold, done wiring, done shock, and I'll kind of take you through where I am and take you through what's next. This is a 2008 Yamaha R6R shock. Bolts directly into the lower clevis, and took a little bit of modification up top, but not much at all. I was told that I might have to trim this box. That is actually doesn't seem to be the case. It looks like it's clearing everything. All it took for fitment was taking this top hole in the shock out to 31/64, I believe. I've looked at it twice and I keep forgetting the number. Yep, 31/64. So it started at 10 mil, which, by the way, that's a pretty awesome bolt. It's got a hole all the way through the center of it. That's the stock Yamaha piece. And that was 9.8 mil, call it 10. And the ZXR is 12. So drilled the top, and I had to narrow it slightly to fit between the bike, but all the modifications were limited to that top hole. And provided the swing arm goes on, that fits, and it gives me a compression, rebound, and preload adjustable shock. In theory here, if I can get it around all the things in the way, get my hand up underneath, there we go. So not a ton of light, but as you can see, throttle body actually clears. Fuel rail, injectors, and we'll take you for a ride out. And I invite you to look at this, because this is going to come back to haunt us in a minute. So take a look at how much room we have here, and the presence of the fancy little petcock. Now, the petcock's got to stay when I go to fuel injection, because the Ducati doesn't have any semblance of a fuel light or a warning level or anything like that, and it's the most annoying thing ever. I want to keep my reserve. So I want the ability to be able to go, oh crap, I ran out of gas, and flip it to the next, which necessitates keeping the vacuum petcock. Excuse me. Plus there's a cutout in the fairing for this. So all told, it comes down to I just want to keep it even if I don't like it. This is the intake manifold. I've put a ton of work into it only to realize that I screwed it up, and I may end up having to cut part of it. Because if you'll notice, with where the throttle body is, it's going to put all this at a really, really weird angle to run the throttle linkage. So I will have to figure that out. I have a little more work to do on this guy, but for a first project, it's not terrible. And at this point, we're totally wired. So OEM pigtail for this, going to Megasquirt wiring. I learned how to build Deutsch connectors. That was entertaining. Hiding in this little box is a map sensor. 3D printed it out, just holding it, keep the weather off of it. It'll get zip tied up to the top of this little beam here. And when I go turbo, I'm going to have to give it reference. Until then, it just needs to know what atmospheric is. So that's just how it's going to be. And like I was saying earlier, I had to swap O2 sensors. So now I have to deal with a plug hiding right about here. Because, of course, nothing can ever really go as easy as I wanted it to. I cut these literally an inch too short to hide the wire where I wanted to. So at this point, I built a little arm to hold it up. It doesn't block the tack. It blocks the 180 kph, but I figure at that speed, I'm just going to be looking at the tack or the salt. So we now come to the next unmitigated disaster. And that is trying to figure out how to build and fit a fuel system in here. Now, I've gone through and picked up the pieces I need. And that is pre-filter, a fuel pump. This is a Walbro 190 liter per hour. Way too much pump for my needs. But has threaded in and outs. It's a known quantity. They make banjo fittings to fit it so I can cut down my overall footprint if I need to. And then this guy. And for those unfamiliar, this is a GM fuel pressure regulator and filter in one. So I'm going to use it as a post filter. This comes off of C5 Corvette. And basically what it gives me is the ability to only have to run one line up to the fuel rail. I don't have to run a return because my return is right here. So fuel goes in, fuel goes out, fuel goes back to the tank. And that's what starts to make this painful. Between the vacuum petcock and the requirement of needing a fuel return without drilling through the tank, I now have to build a swirl pop, which means I have to, in this little space here, fit the pump, the pre-filter, the post-filter, which as you can see already take up a good chunk of room, plus what will amount to being an 8-inch by 4-inch by 4-inch tank with another couple inches of depth in sump. Now earlier you saw the petcock sticks down into there, which means it can't go all the way across here. So it ends up having to come over and then basically scoot down as a unit. So it ends up being a rectangle with an offset little rectangle on the side. I can picture it in my head. I'm struggling to draft it up and come up with a cut list for it. So what we're going to end up doing, though, is out the bottom of the sump, it's going to shoot a 6AN line this way. And at least for a distance, that's going to be a soft line. So 6AN off the sump, 6AN female, rubber line, double back around to come into this pre-filter. So we'll figure this pre-filter will sit somewhere in here. It'll come out, it'll loop back into it. Then it'll come out of here and loop back into the fuel pump. And that'll be a hard line. My goal is to keep the lines as small as possible and not deal with that whole rubber lines don't want to go where you want them to go. So I got to add just enough flexibility to make sure everything fits and can't crack through vibration. And then also keep it tight and small. So it'll come out the fuel pump. It will come up the front side of the sump where this will have a stud to mount it. This will come out over to the fuel rail, and the fuel rail will get a 90 put on it somewhere in this area. And then, so when it comes out, it'll go from the outlet of this guy into that, hugging one side or the other of the bike. And then that should do me there. So a combination of hard line, soft line coming up here. Since this has a return, the return will go straight back into the sump. And then I need to come up with a barb fitting for the petcock into the sump. This way, I have a reserve that the fuel pump can draw on and return while the engine's kicking over without draining the pump dry or making it suck air. And until the motor starts pulling vacuum, because I'm going to keep the stock vacuum fittings and go straight up to the tank the way it used to, it'll be able to then replenish from the gas tank into that sump. I get a little extra fuel capacity, 2, maybe 3 liters. And I gain fail-safing on the fuel pump setup. So that's the last 2 big challenges on here, is building a portable, safe fuel system and coming up with a throttle linkage here. There's one more project I forgot I have to do. The astute among you might have noticed there's nothing holding that fuel rail down on the bike. If you come over here, you'll notice that's just sitting there, and 50 PSI is going to send it for a flight. And I screwed up. It turns out drilling stainless, even at the lowest speed my drill press will do, absolutely nuked my drill bits, wouldn't get through the metal, and fought me the whole way. I don't really like the hold downs. They were going to be, they would have been I guess they would have been in shear is the word I'm looking for. They could have deformed and popped up out anyway. So I got to come up with a better way to mount the fuel rail. And I don't have a ton of options, but I'll come up with something. But that's the other fight I have to do. Now, the nice thing is I'm using Ducati injectors, which meant I ended up with 2 of these Ducati throttle bodies. And if you look, it's a really, really cool setup, because it lets me keep the choke. Even though I'm going to be fuel injected, I get a fast idle clicker. So I got to figure out how to set this whole linkage in place on that manifold, and how to convert the Volkswagen D shaft to this D shaft, which will probably be somewhere here. I have another set of these that I've already been experimenting with. And that will probably just be cut that D shaft, TIG weld it onto the other shaft, and then everything fits. So, sacrificial throttle bodies, always a good thing. And that just lives with LS parts right now. And that's pretty much where we're at. Coils are wired, injectors are wired, MAP, TPS, and hiding way up in there, intake air temp are all wired. We've got coolant temp. We've got everything to make this run except gas. And give me a week.